2 years ago. I sat in a hospital parking lot, gripping my phone with shaking hands, begging my only son to listen. "Joel, I need to tell you something important." His reply cut deeper than the diagnosis I carried. "Text me, Mom, I'm busy." That was the moment I realized I would be fighting cancer alone. My name is Damaris Ellington, and this is the story of how my family abandoned me when I needed them most, only to come crawling back when they discovered what I had inherited. The hospital smelled of disinfectant, sharp and sterile, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes long after you leave. Overhead, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, their glare turning every face pale and flat. I sat across from the oncologist as he slid a folder across the desk, his voice steady, clinical, practiced. Ovarian cancer. Stage 2. He spoke of chemotherapy cycles, survival rates, the importance of having a strong support system by my side. I nodded, pretending to take it all in, but inside I already knew the truth. No one was coming with me. By the time I stepped outside, the Michigan winter slapped my face with air so cold it made my eyes water. I pulled my coat tight, phone heavy in my hand. My fingers trembled as I dialed Joel's number. When he picked up, I heard the hum of office noise behind him. "Mom, I'm in a meeting. Can you text me?" His tone was clipped, impatient. The way people sound when they've already decided your words aren't worth their time. I tried to push the word out, cancer, but before I could, the line went dead. I stared at the black screen for a long moment before calling Marissa. Her voice poured through the line like syrup, sweet but artificial. "Oh my gosh, wow, so shocking. We'll have to look at our schedule." Her words were soft, practiced, but behind them was nothing. No offer to come, no promise to call back, just silence, stretching out until it became clear that I had been dismissed. I walked to my car, each step crunching on the frozen pavement, the cold cutting through my gloves. I sat behind the wheel, phone clutched in my lap, and let the tears fall. It was the first time I'd cried since the day my husband died years ago. Not because of the cancer, I was ready to fight that battle, but because I finally understood the place I held in my son's life. I wasn't a priority. I wasn't even a thought worth finishing a sentence for. To him, to them, I had become nothing more than a message that could wait until later. And in that parking lot, engine idling, breath fogging up the glass, I realized something that cut deeper than the diagnosis itself. I would be fighting for my life entirely alone, the first Thursday of treatment. I pushed open the heavy glass door of the oncology center and stepped into the room with my purse hugged tight against my ribs, as if it were the only companion I had left. Recliners lined the walls, each occupied by someone tethered to an IV, but what caught my eye were the clusters of family around them. Children peeling apples for their mothers, spouses carefully unwrapping containers of homemade soup, soft voices of encouragement filling the air. I lowered myself into the empty chair assigned to me, the silence around me louder than any words. A young nurse named Hannah adjusted my IV, her voice gentle. "Will someone be here to pick you up, ma'am? You really shouldn't drive yourself home after this." Her eyes lingered, searching my face. I forced a smile and lied. "They're just running late." She gave a knowing look but didn't press. 3 hours later, woozy and nauseated, I gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles and drove myself home through the Michigan cold. As the weeks stretched on, the treatment stripped away more than my strength. One morning I woke to strands of hair scattered across my pillow, and by nightfall, clumps slid through my fingers in the shower. Desperate. I called Joel. "Sweetheart, my hair, it's falling out, all of it. I'm so scared." His sigh crackled through the phone. "Mom, that's normal with chemo. It'll grow back. Listen, I've got a presentation to finish. Can I call you later?" The line went silent before I could answer. I drove myself to a wig shop on the outskirts of town. The saleswoman fussed kindly as I tried on synthetic caps that itched and looked nothing like the woman I remembered in the mirror. $200 later, I walked out with a wig that sat awkwardly on my head, a poor disguise for the stranger staring back at me. The days blurred together in a rhythm of appointments and solitude. My phone rarely rang unless it was a doctor's office. Never Joel. Never Marissa. I told myself I was tough enough, but late at night, when the house creaked and the silence pressed in, I understood the truth. The cancer wasn't the cruelest part of this journey. The silence was. It was a humid June afternoon when I sifted through the pile of mail at my old Michigan house. Amid the medical bills and circulars, a thick envelope stood out, bearing the return address of a law firm in St. Paul, Minnesota. My heart skipped. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. The words swam before my eyes. My half-brother, Malcolm, had died suddenly of a heart attack. Though we hadn't spoken in years, he had left everything to me. His vineyard by the lake, the old timber house that sat on its edge, and investments totaling more than $1.5 million. I sank onto the porch steps, stunned. Malcolm and I had grown apart. Our last conversation little more than a strained holiday greeting. Yet in death, he had reached for me in a way my own son never had. A week later, I stood on the gravel drive of that Minnesota estate. The house rose before me, weathered but dignified, its wide windows catching the light of the setting sun. Rows of vines stretched down toward the lake, their leaves shimmering green in the golden evening. The air was sweet with the scent of earth and grapes, and for the first time in months, I felt my chest loosen. I walked through the creaking doorway and ran my hand along the banister, feeling the presence of a man who, despite distance, had remembered me when it mattered most. That house, that vineyard, it was more than property. It was proof that I wasn't entirely forgotten, that somewhere, someone had still seen me as worth protecting. The bitter irony settled deep. My own son had left me to face cancer in silence, yet the brother I thought I'd lost long ago had given me the one thing Joel never could: shelter, security, and a sense of being chosen. And I knew in that moment, this inheritance would change everything. The September morning was cool, the air outside tinged with the faint scent of ripening grapes. I was pouring coffee in the kitchen when the sharp chime of the doorbell cut through the quiet. From the front window, I saw a silhouette I hadn't expected in years. When I opened the door, there she was, Marissa, standing on the porch in a teal silk dress and heels too delicate for gravel. Perfume rising around her in a sweet cloud. Smile stretched wide like it had been rehearsed in a mirror. She stepped forward quickly, arms flung wide. "Mother, you look incredible. And this place, oh my God, it's breathtaking." Her embrace was warm in form but cold in substance, her hands barely brushing my shoulders before she pulled back to let her eyes roam. I watched her scan the foyer, pupils darting from the crystal chandelier to the oak dining table, pausing on the framed landscapes that had hung there since Malcolm first restored the house. She wasn't admiring. She was calculating, like an appraiser cataloging square footage and resale value. As we sat in the living room, she kept glancing toward the wine racks, the antique clock, the fireplace mantel. Between sips of coffee, she tilted her head, feigning concern. Managing a vineyard like this all alone must be overwhelming. Joel worries about you. He just wants to make sure you're safe. Her tone carried the same artificial sweetness as her perfume. I smiled faintly but said nothing. It had been 2 years since I'd seen her. 2 years of silence. 2 years of fighting for my life without so much as a visit. And now here she was, radiating charm. Yet every word and glance was tethered not to me but to the inheritance she had suddenly discovered. For the first time in years, I felt anger stir hotter than grief. She hadn't come to check on my health. She had come to take stock. In the days after her unexpected visit, fragments of conversation began to reach me, each one cutting deeper than the last. Helen, my 75-year-old neighbor with sharp eyes and a blunt tongue, stopped me at the mailbox. She leaned close and whispered, "Your daughter-in-law came by last week. Asked if you've been forgetful lately. Wanted to know if I'd noticed you wandering or getting mixed up about dates." Helen's lips thinned. "I told her you've got a sharper memory than me, and that if she's so concerned, maybe she should have been around while you were sick." Her words left me unsettled, but it wasn't the last. On a trip back to Michigan to close out some business, I stopped by Maria's, the neighbor who had lived next door for 15 years. She clasped my hands, her expression heavy. "I didn't know if I should tell you this, but Marissa came by more than once while you were in treatment. Said you weren't fit to live alone anymore, that you might need to be placed in a home where you'd be properly supervised." My chest tightened. I remembered every late-night drive back from chemo, exhausted but lucid, every bill paid on time, every lonely grocery run. None of it resembled the picture Marissa had been painting behind my back. Back at the clinic, I stopped in to see Dr. Mitchell. He adjusted his glasses, his face shifting uncomfortably when I asked if anyone had called about me. Finally, he admitted, "Yes, Mrs. Ellington. Your daughter-in-law phoned several times, inquiring whether chemotherapy could cause cognitive decline. She seemed very interested in whether you were experiencing confusion or lapses." Each revelation fell like another stone into my stomach. While I'd been fighting nausea, hair loss, and the crushing weight of solitude, Marissa had been waging a quiet campaign to recast me as a confused, incompetent old woman. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Her sudden reappearance at my door wasn't kindness, it was strategy. Every word, every sugary smile, every comment about how difficult the vineyard must be alone had been a carefully measured step in something larger. And then the question began to echo in my mind, chilling in its clarity. Was Joel part of this too? Were they preparing to have me declared unfit, to seize guardianship, to fold Malcolm's estate into their control while locking me away like an afterthought? The silence of my family had already scarred me. But this deliberate rewriting of my life was a betrayal far more dangerous. And for the first time, I realized I might need to fight not just for my health, but for my very independence. The rain came down steady that afternoon in Michigan, a gray curtain against the windows as I sorted through the last of the files I'd stored away for decades. Boxes lined the walls of my old study, their cardboard edges soft from years of neglect. I told myself I was only there to finish clearing out the remnants of my past, but what I found would change everything. At the bottom of a box marked Utilities, beneath brittle receipts and faded tax returns, lay a manila folder. The paper inside was crisp compared to the rest, deliberate, and my pulse quickened as I read the heading, Petition for Guardianship. The petitioner, Joel Ellington. My eyes blurred, but I forced myself to keep reading. Attached was a sworn statement from Marissa, my daughter-in-law. Each line struck like a blade. Claims that I had forgotten to pay bills, gotten lost driving to familiar places, spoken incoherently at family gatherings. Every word a lie, constructed carefully to paint me as a woman unraveling. At the bottom, in a lawyer's hurried script, a note was scrawled, "Need more evidence of incapacity." My breath caught. They hadn't just abandoned me during chemo. They had been plotting to strip me of my independence, to confine me in a facility while they claimed Malcolm's estate as their own. I sat back in the chair, the storm outside echoing the storm inside. Every suspicion, every uneasy glance, every whisper I'd heard suddenly crystallized into undeniable truth. My son and his wife had not merely turned their backs on me, they had sharpened their knives. This wasn't gossip or paranoia. This was their blueprint. And now, clutched in my hands, I held the smoking gun. The vineyard glowed amber under the soft wash of the weekend sunset. Inside, I laid the table with care, a white cloth stretched taut, Malcolm's wine decanted into crystal glasses, roast chicken steaming at the center. From the outside, it looked like a family gathering, but inside me, the storm still raged. Joel arrived in khakis and a polite smile, Marissa in another elegant dress, her perfume wafting ahead of her. Eli trailed behind, small shoulders hunched, a fork clutched like a toy once we sat down. They spoke in easy tones, Joel about promotions, Marissa about their trip to Florida, their voices as polished as their smiles. I let them talk, let them fill the room with words, until the moment came. Halfway through the meal, I reached beneath my chair, pulled out the folded petition, and laid it flat in the center of the table. The silence was immediate and suffocating. Joel's glass trembled in his hand, the wine inside rippling like the surface of a lake in wind. Marissa's eyes darted to the paper, then back to me, her smile faltering before she caught it and forced it back into place. "You've misunderstood," she rushed out, her voice syrup-sweet. "We only wanted to protect you." I leaned forward, locking eyes with them both. "Protect me," I said evenly, "by declaring me incompetent, by turning me into a woman who can't think for herself?" Joel's face crumpled, guilt flooding his expression, but his signature glared up from the page like an indictment. Marissa tried to keep her composure, but fear flickered in her eyes, a recognition that the game had shifted. Across the table, Eli had stopped fiddling with his fork. His wide, innocent gaze darted between us, confusion etched across his face. He didn't understand the words. Not fully. But children don't need vocabulary to feel the heaviness of betrayal. I drew in a breath, steady and cold. "I've made preparations," I told them, my voice like glass. "The law is on my side, and after what I've seen, I no longer consider you my family." The chandelier above cast fractured light across the table, illuminating every crack in the illusion they had tried so hard to preserve. In that moment, I knew the battle lines were no longer invisible. They were carved in ink and lies. And now, finally, in truth, the vineyard shimmered gold in the fading light, vines casting long shadows across the rows as the sun sank lower. Inside the house, I was folding laundry at the kitchen table when the doorbell rang. Once, twice, then again, pounding insistently. My stomach tightened. I already knew who it was before I reached the door. Through the glass, I saw Marissa, but she was no longer the polished woman who had once stood here in silk and perfume. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, makeup streaked, eyes wild, her face twisted, raw with fury. When I cracked the door, she screamed, "You can't cut us out of your life like this! We are your family!" The words ricocheted off the porch, less plea than accusation, her voice shrill with desperation. I didn't answer. I only held her stare. That silence seemed to unravel her further. She pounded on the door with both fists, then, with a guttural cry, picked up a garden stone and smashed it against the pane. Glass shattered inward, tinkling across the floor. Before I could step back, she shoved the door open and stormed inside, Her heels clattered on the hardwood as she advanced, pointing at me like I was the thief, like I was the betrayer. You think you can humiliate us, destroy everything we've built? You owe us, Damaris. You owe Joel. You owe me. Her voice cracked, equal parts rage and fear. My hands didn't shake this time. I picked up the phone, dialed 911, and calmly told the dispatcher, "This is Damaris Ellington. I have a restraining order against my daughter-in-law. She's in my house. She just broke my window." Marissa froze when she realized what I'd said, chest heaving. But she didn't leave. Instead, she paced like a caged animal, ranting about sacrifices she'd made, about the inheritance that wasn't hers but she believed should be. I stayed seated, phone pressed to my ear, voice steady as I gave the address. Minutes later, red and blue lights strobed against the vineyard rows outside. The sound of sirens drew closer, then tires crunched over gravel. 2 officers stepped through the broken doorway, their flashlights sweeping over the glittering shards on my floor, over Marissa's disheveled figure trembling with fury. She lunged toward them, shouting, "She's trying to ruin our family. She's senile. You don't understand." But the words collapsed under the weight of the scene, the shattered glass, the jagged rocks still lying on my rug, my quiet presence at the kitchen table. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for violating a restraining order and unlawful entry," one officer said firmly as he snapped the cuffs around her wrists. Marissa's scream filled the room, high and piercing. She twisted, mascara streaking down her cheeks, no trace left of the careful image she had spent years cultivating. The perfect wife, the polished daughter-in-law, the gracious hostess, all of it fell away. What remained was pure desperation, bare and ugly. I stood still as they led her through my living room, past the shelves lined with Malcolm's books, past the family photos I'd once displayed with pride. The red and blue lights bathed the walls, the reflection of steel cuffs glinting like a verdict. For a moment, I remembered sitting in that sterile chemotherapy ward, my hands shaking as poison dripped into my veins, believing I was invisible to the people who should have loved me most. Back then, I had been weak, trembling, waiting for a call that never came. Now I watched from the doorway, head held high, as Marissa stumbled across my porch with her hands bound. The irony was sharp, almost sweet. The woman who had tried to brand me incompetent was being hauled away in front of the neighbors, her own mask stripped away for everyone to see. And as the cruiser pulled down the gravel drive, taillights glowing red against the dusk, I realized this was no longer about survival. This was about standing tall in the wreckage of their lies. I had been alone in that hospital room once. Tonight, I stood in my own home, unshaken, watching betrayal carried off in the back of a police car. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper, the kind of place where every sound echoed too loudly. Spring light streamed through the tall windows, catching dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside my attorney, my hands folded neatly in my lap. My heart was steady, my breath even. I had walked into this room carrying years of abandonment and betrayal, but I wasn't here to tremble. I was here to be heard. The judge entered, robes flowing, and the clerk called the case. Across the aisle, Joel avoided my gaze, his shoulders slumped in a suit that suddenly looked too big for him. Marissa sat rigid beside him, hair smoothed and face painted, but her eyes betrayed the panic simmering beneath the surface. My attorney stood first, laying a stack of documents on the table. "Your Honor, this is the petition for guardianship filed by Mr. Joel Ellington, with sworn statements from his wife, Marissa Ellington. These claims allege that Mrs. Damaris Ellington was incapable of managing her own affairs due to cognitive decline during cancer treatment. He slid the paper forward, and the judge's eyes lingered on the signatures. Joel's bold stroke, Marissa's neat loops, evidence that no amount of excuses could erase. When the defense tried to frame it as concern, my attorney lifted his hand. Concern doesn't require fabrication. Concern doesn't require dismantling a woman's independence to seize her estate. The first witness called was Dr. Mitchell. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and faced the judge. I was Mrs. Ellington's oncologist for 2 years. At no time did she exhibit cognitive decline. On the contrary, she was one of the most informed and engaged patients I've treated. She asked precise questions, managed her medication schedule, and always understood her treatment plan. If anything, her resilience was remarkable. His voice carried no hesitation, only truth. Next came Hannah, the young nurse who had once knelt beside me with gentle eyes. She spoke softly but firmly. I remember Mrs. Ellington well. She always drove herself to and from treatments. She kept a notebook where she wrote down every instruction. The only thing unusual about her situation was that she came alone. Most patients had someone with them. She didn't. That's not incapacity. That's loneliness. My chest tightened at her words, the sting of recognition. But I held my head high. Then Helen took the stand. At 75, her cane clicked with each step, but her voice was strong. Marissa came to me more than once, asked if Damaris seemed forgetful, confused, if she was safe living alone. I told her what I saw with my own eyes. Damaris is sharp as a tack. If she was worried, she should have been helping during chemo, not gossiping at the mailbox. The courtroom murmured. Maria from Michigan followed, her voice heavier with regret. Marissa came to my door, too, said Damaris was making strange decisions and maybe needed to be put in a nursing home. I told her I never saw anything like that. Damaris paid her bills, kept her house, drove herself. I thought it was odd at the time. Now I understand why she was asking. With each testimony, the walls of Joel and Marissa's narrative crumbled. I watched Joel sink lower in his chair, his hand pressed against his mouth. Marissa dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, but no one leaned forward in sympathy. Finally, the judge addressed the room. His voice was deliberate, resonant. There is no evidence that Mrs. Ellington has ever lacked capacity. What is evident is a pattern of deceptive behavior from Mr. and Mrs. Ellington designed to strip her of her independence and control of her estate. This court finds their actions to be misleading and potentially fraudulent. Consequences will follow. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Joel kept his eyes on the table. The proud son who once dismissed my calls now reduced to silence, the weight of his choices pulling his career down with him. Marissa let out a sob, loud and theatrical, but the sound only seemed to push the room further away. No one reached for her. No one believed her anymore. I sat taller, my hands steady. For 2 years, I had been fighting to be seen, to be remembered, to prove that I was not invisible. And now, in the full light of justice, the truth was undeniable. They had tried to bury me under lies. Instead, they had unearthed their own ruin. In that courtroom, I wasn't just a cancer survivor. I was a woman restored. My voice, my dignity, my right to live on my own terms, affirmed before the very people who had tried to steal it. And as I stood to leave, I felt something deeper than victory. I felt whole. The vineyard was alive with color, the rows heavy with clusters of deep purple grapes that caught the afternoon sun like jewels. The air was thick with sweetness, a perfume of earth and fruit that wrapped itself around me as I moved slowly between the vines. My hands worked steadily, clipping each bunch, the weight of the basket growing. yet my heart felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time, the rhythm of the harvest wasn't just work, it was healing. Every snip of the shears was a reminder that life had gone on, that it had pushed through even when I thought I couldn't. I remembered the sterile chemo room, the smell of antiseptic, the empty chair beside me. Those memories still hurt, but here, with the vines pressing in and the sun warming my shoulders, they felt distant, like shadows retreating into the horizon. When the baskets were full, I carried them back toward the house. The porch was already alive with voices. Helen was there, her cane resting against the railing, laughing as she poured glasses of the first press. The Petersons brought bread warm from the oven, and Maria, visiting from Michigan, laid out jars of homemade jam. One by one, neighbors filled the wooden porch, plates passing, glasses raised. We sat together under the string lights that Malcolm had once hung, their glow soft against the coming dusk. Glasses clinked, the ruby wine catching sparks of gold in the lamplight. They toasted not just to the harvest, but to me, to survival, to the strange gift of second chances. I looked around and realized with a sudden ache of gratitude, this was family, not the people who shared my blood, but the ones who showed up, who stayed. As laughter rippled through the night, my phone buzzed against the table. The number froze me in place. I stepped away to answer, heart tight. "Grandma?" Eli's voice was small, tentative, almost breaking. I know you love me." The words hit harder than any verdict, any gavel. Tears filled my eyes, spilling before I could stop them. "I do, sweetheart," I whispered, my throat tight. "More than you'll ever know, and I always will." On the other end of the line, silence, then a faint sniffle, before the call ended. I stood at the porch railing, phone still in my hand, the lake glimmering under the last light of the sun. The surface shimmered with gold and violet, fractured reflections of a world that had tried to break me but hadn't succeeded. Behind me, my neighbors laughed, glasses lifted again, voices warm against the night air. I breathed in the scent of grapes and wood smoke and let the tears fall freely. Blood had turned away from me, plotted against me, betrayed me in the cruelest ways. But love, real love, had found its way back through unlikely hands and open hearts. As the first stars blinked to life above the vines, I understood something with a clarity I'd never had before. I had lost a family I thought permanent, but I had gained one that was true. And in their company, beneath the glow of harvest lights, I finally knew what it felt like to never be left behind again.